Welcome to the Health and Healthcare Forum. I'm Roberta Hall. This program summarizes a visit to the DEQ public comment on December 6 concerning the coal exports to China. It consists of several conversations. The first with Charlie Miller, oceanographer. Then it goes to Ann from Salem, working for Sierra Club. Leaf, who works for Beyond Coal, a press conference before the public comment period began, followed by a few comments at the outdoor rally, including one with Santa Claus himself, concluding with a conversation with Lloyd Marbet. I'm talking to Charlie Miller on the way to the hearing on the coal exports, and he's an oceanographer. So he has lots of reasons for going, but let's hear some of them. Charlie?
They're the same as yours. Being an oceanographer doesn't change much.
But it does give you a little bit of insight as to the many different problems that coal use itself, coal mining, coal burning, as well as coal export. And this one has it all. Yeah,
it does. You're shredding the earth to get minerals and coal and oil out of the ground. That's particularly important for coal, which in Appalachia they're taking mountain tops and pushing them into valleys. They've taken so much of Appalachian coal that what's left is full of quartz as well as carbon, and so it's particularly dangerous for miners who end up with silicosis coupled with their black lung. On it goes. In Montana, they rip open the prairie and dig out layers of coal, and they claim they bulldoze stuff back over the holes, but they claim it's reconstituted prairie and no different than it was before, but that's impossible. It takes incredibly long times for soil qualities to recover and vegetation to recover. Normal vegetation.
In Wyoming now, I lived in Wyoming in 1960, 1963, and that was just after the Union Pacific had changed to diesel and the coal mining collapsed. So our town was an economic disaster. But those days are long gone, and now Wyoming is just a series of mines of all sorts.
All over. Often they're burning the coal in Wyoming in power plants adjacent to the mines and shipping the power out over high tension lines, which are AC at high tension lines that are very inefficient. So the power losses on the way to major population centers are truly awful. It would be better almost to have that coal on trains closer to the site of use, just so that the amount of coal burned would be less or more efficiently used. But the main thing is that when you burn carbon, you get carbon dioxide. Coal is 98% carbon, so you get very inefficient fire. If you burn hydrogen, you get huge amounts more energy per ton than you do with coal. And if you burn methane from natural gas, you get 4 hydrogens burning for each carbon. So that's, again, greatly more efficient in terms of energy you get per ton.
The problem is that it's coal that's most abundant, right?
Coal is very abundant, and it's easy to manage in some ways because it's a solid. It doesn't have to be contained under pressure like gases. It doesn't have to be in tanks. On the other hand, it doesn't flow either, so it can't be put in pipelines short of making powder out of it and mixing it with water.
And the tendency is to get the cheapest, the most abundant, easiest, and get it wherever somebody wants it.
Well, China is looking to the long term in doing this. They have a lot of coal, but if they burn Australian coal and United States coal and Canadian coal instead of their coal, then their overall supply will last longest of anyone else's.
A very old civilization using very old civilization strategies.
Yes. So part of the foolishness of this is that so over the long term, for things other than burning, we need coal. We need oil. We need oil for plastics and syringes and everything we use in our modern life. It's insane to be burning these things at all. So CO2 isn't the only issue, but it's a big one, the big one. Because atmosphere is warming up. There's just no doubt about it, and there's no doubt about it that it's the carbon dioxide that's causing it. The guy published a study just 3-4 days ago. He looked at all of the literature since 1990 in the peer-reviewed scientific literature and found 13,500 papers. Of those, 29 were in denial that human activities burning carbon sources were the cause of global warming.
Wow.
29 out of 13,000. And if you actually dig those 29 papers up and read them, you realize they snuck through the system somehow. They're laughable as science. There's just no question. No scientist of any who's not being paid by the oil industry or the coal industry will claim that it's anything else than human activity burning fossil fuel. It isn't just a matter of consensus. The facts are inescapable.
So what are our alternatives?
We as a society, a global society, everyone has very little choice than to find alternative energy, and that requires first that we just use much less energy. There are all kinds of ways to do that. We avoid them all the time, but at our peril. What will happen? The most important thing will happen is that the warming will cause melting of the global ice stock on land. The bulk of that is 7 meters of sea level rise equivalent stacked on Greenland and over 70 meters stacked on Antarctica. It could all go, and it's starting to look like it's going to go in a catastrophic fashion from Greenland at least, very fast. Could be 20 years to be all on us. That will put downtown Portland, Jansen Beach, and the waterfront on the Columbia underwater up to the top of the first story at low tide, and there will be high tides.
Wow.
If Antarctica were all to melt, which is quite feasible within the century, this century, sea level will rise 80 meters, which would put seashore into central Arkansas. The Dutch will have to move to Germany. They don't like Germans.
They may learn to like them. They'll have to. But looking back through the past eons, this is not the first time this has happened, but the change so cataclysmically short.
You have to go back a long way. Sea level has gone up and down around 200 meters during the cycling of the ice ages, at least 4 times. During the peak of the Wisconsin Ice Age, 18,000 years ago, sea level was 200 meters below where it is now. The rivers cut canyons across the continental, what is now the continental shelf, that proved that it was down there. And where was that ice? It was in continental ice sheets that are primarily now gone, except for Antarctica and Greenland. The changes that have been in play the last 7 or 8 years include the melting of sea ice in the Antarctic. 20 years ago, the whole Arctic Ocean remained frozen all year. A lot of the ice was multi-year ice.
And that's why we're in a bus filled with people, 56 human beings from south of Portland, so we're going all the way to Portland. Why are we here?
They need a DEQ permit. Port Morrow near Boardman. DEQ's job is to protect Oregonians from environmental damage. They can just say, no, you don't get this permit, and that's what they need to do.
Do you think the DEQ is concerned at all about climate change and ice melting, or only about the pollution problems, the noise problems, the traffic problems, et cetera, that the trains cause?
If the DEQ is not concerned about global warming, they are not concerned about the most important problem humanity faces today. It's more important than Palestine and Israel, more important than anything. We cannot live with more than 7 billion people on a globe that's 3 degrees centigrade warmer than it is right now. We cannot do it. The droughts, the floods, everything will make life as we know it impossible. The northward march of tropical diseases on and on and on.
So this message needs to be loud and clear for the DEQ and for the
everybody,
citizens of the
everyone
state.
who lives on Earth needs to be thinking about how they can contribute to easing this problem.
So this is the issue, and that's why we're here.
I'm from Salem. My name's Ann, and I've been involved in the Sierra Club meetings many times the last couple months, and I campaign out on the streets a little, and I feel strongly that we really have to stop these coal trains because it's bad for our health. So many issues with lungs and breathing, and people already are affected by these kinds of ailments, and it would be way worse. And also the soil would be impacted with the dust along the tracks, and the noise would be horrible, and the trains would block traffic so much more, and it would be hard for people to get through, especially emergency equipment. And besides all that, burning it in any part of the world, that just puts more pollution in the air. We have to stop that and develop alternative energies.
What would you say if people say, as I imagine people will, well, the Chinese will get it anyway and they'll burn it? Is this important? What can we do about that?
We don't have to enable them. The way I see it, it's like enabling people that are drinking too much, and if we buy the alcohol for them, we're just assisting them in doing harm. So we don't need to help them.
It's great talking to you. Thank you, Ann.
Thank you.
And you're working with Beyond Coal. What is your name?
My name is Leif Bamberg. We're working with a coalition of Sierra Club and Greenpeace with the Power Past Coal campaign. We're here at the DEQ hearing to encourage any kind of denial of permits for the Pacific Coal project that's coming through to build export terminals in the bay to go through the Columbia River.
What is motivating you personally?
Well, I've worked on clean energy campaigns for about 5 or 6 years as a volunteer and activist. Down in Austin, Texas, I was working against the Keystone Pipeline, and we were able to successfully shut down our coal plant down there and bring that energy up to Portland now.
Do you have any particular interest in the human health issues around coal? And I know there are many.
Absolutely. As another further personal motivation, I do have cystic fibrosis, which is a genetic lung disease. That does give me great impetus to fight for clean air quality, because I do know what it's like to have poor lung function imposed on you, not through personal choices such as smoking or bad health, but that is similar to what people would face in environmental situations involving coal. Individuals suffering lung disease, not from something they did, but something that was done to them. Understanding that and being able to empathize that really gives me a lot of personal energy to help fight in a cause like this. One of the reasons I located to Portland was for cleaner air quality. I can definitely tell a great difference being in this cleaner Northwest area as opposed to Texas, which has, atrocious air quality. And so, I don't want to come here expecting clean air just for coal to chug its way through our city.
Right. When you go to the coast, do you feel that fresh air from the
Absolutely,
ocean?
yeah.
You do, yeah. Well, that's wonderful. Thank you very much, and for your own health condition, I wish you the very best.
Thank you very much.
I'm here today because I've seen firsthand the damages coal does to our health, environment, quality of life for communities from mine to rail and from port to plant. I believe we have a choice before us to protect our communities and thrive, or let amber energy lock us into a dirty and dangerous future. We have with us today a collection of concerned citizens and leaders from around Oregon whose communities would be affected by the myriad impacts and uncertainties posed by the transport of coal through our towns and beloved places. The list of concerns are long, and we know you are all gathered here tonight to share yours with the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. Their duty is to maintain and enhance Oregon's air, water, and land. And right now we'll hear from leaders to highlight some of the chief threats that Amber's project proposes to us. I'd like to invite up Councillor Kathy Fitzpatrick, who is a member of the Mosier City Council, which was one of the first cities in Oregon to pass a resolution opposing coal export. Fitzpatrick is the president of Main Street Mosier, which is a community organization that advocates for downtown revitalization in the city of Mosier. She is also a small business owner and a recreationist in the Columbia River Gorge.
I am representing Mosier my small community, but also the other river communities in the National Scenic Area of the Columbia River Gorge. We live on the water, we play on the water. What happens to the river happens to our communities. We're very concerned about Member Energy's proposal to barge coal on the Columbia River. So I really strongly urge our state agencies, and especially DEQ tonight, to take a really hard look at all of the proposals on the table to traffic the coal, because taken together they are all going to affect communities like mine.
I would now like to introduce Dr. Martin Donohue, who is an adjunct professor at the Department of Community Health at Portland State University and is the author of Public Health and Social Justice and runs the Public Health and Social Justice website.
I'm privileged to be here to speak about an issue which I'm particularly passionate about. I'm speaking on behalf of myself as well as Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility and my patients. And I'm going to give you some statistics, but I want you to remember that patients are just statistics with faces. And I see these patients who suffer consequent to our pollution of the environment on a daily basis. Addressing the broader issue of coal exports, we're talking about barging down the Columbia, and we're also talking about trains coming through the Pacific Northwest, bringing 150 million tons of coal from the Powder River Basin per year to be shipped to Asia. The trains, for instance, will be 26 per day. They're between a mile and a mile and a half long, greater than 100 cars, and 4 diesel engines per train. So when we think about the pollution that's consequent to the coal that's coming off the barge, or the fires that might result on barges that are traveling down the Columbia, the first issue to address is diesel particulate matter that comes from the coal trains itself. And diesel particulate matter is associated with impaired lung development in children, an increase in emergency room visits for asthma and lung disease, an increase in the risk of heart attack, stroke, and increase in certain cancers. The next issue is the coal dust itself that will be blowing off the barges and off the trains into our local communities. This coal dust is associated with bronchitis, emphysema, and for those who are working up close and working at the terminals, a tremendously increased risk of black lung disease as well as cancer. And they found in a recent Australian study a cancer rate that was 3 times the baseline population in workers who had been employed at coal terminals. The next issue is one of noise. The noise of the barges, of course, and the interference with traffic down the Columbia, but the noise of the trains in particular. This is something that we know from a number of scientific studies, that noise can impair cognitive development and learning in children, that it's associated with an increased risk of high blood pressure, arrhythmia, heart disease, stroke, and exacerbation of a number of different mental illnesses, as well as impaired sleep, which leads to fatigue and poor functioning. Trains are also subject to accidents, just as barges are. Barges might catch on fire, they might crash, they might collide with other watercraft on the Columbia, those that are transporting other products, that are involved in other forms of commerce, or commercial fishermen or other individuals. There have been, over the last 2 years, approximately 32 train derailments in the United States, and some of these have involved the transport of coal. When this coal dust is spilled, there's obviously a lot of it getting into the air, but it's incumbent upon the local communities then to pay for the cleanup of those derailments. And so this is going to be coming out of our tax money. The next important issue is the issue of mercury, because when coal is burned in power plants, it doesn't matter if it's burned in China or here in the United States or in India, mercury gets into the environment. And the number one source of mercury, which is a toxic heavy metal, the number one source of mercury worldwide is the burning of coal in coal-fired power plants. And mercury is toxic to fetal development. In the United States today, it's estimated that between 300,000 and 600,000 women of reproductive age have toxic levels of mercury. The mercury that comes from the coal-fired power plants that are burning it in China is going to make it over to the Pacific Northwest. It's going to make it into our environment and be toxic to fetal development. There's also, of course, the issue of global warming and climate change. Whether coal is burned here or in China, again, the increased CO2 and other emissions that make it into the environment are going to travel worldwide, and the Pacific Northwest is particularly vulnerable on a number of fronts to climate change. The other issue is the issue of jobs. Now, it's been stated by some that the proposals will bring jobs to the Pacific Northwest. The problem is these are temporary jobs. Health consequences of the workers who have toiled at those jobs will be covered possibly by our tax money if the workers are on Medicare or Medicaid, the companies are going to be long gone and not paying for those health consequences. And these are jobs that are basically involved in a 19th century technology. We're in the 21st century now. We need to move beyond coal. We need green energy to the types of energy that actually, were it not for the tremendous subsidies that we give to coal, oil, would be cheaper in the long run, not to mention better for the health of the planet and the health of all of our citizens. And so there have been those who have said, well, I'm anti-jobs. The reality is, I have spoken out on many occasions on behalf of workers, on behalf of a living wage, and I am very pro-labor. I am concerned, though, that the ultimate economic downside of this might be a loss of jobs overall, because it's estimated through a study that was done recently in Seattle that the delays in train traffic might lead to an hour and a half to 2 hours of time per day that people simply can't visit those businesses. So people are going to lose their jobs, businesses are going to go under, and ultimately there may be a negative jobs down for this after all. We need to move forward. We need to leave this coal in the ground, sequester carbon where it's safe, where it's not going to harm us and harm future generations. And I plead with the department, the DEQ, to delay the permit until there has been a wide-scale study of the effects on human and environmental health of coal transport through the Pacific Northwest. We are not the coal chute to China.
I would next like to invite up Mia Rebeck, who is a junior at Reed College.
Hello. I moved to Portland 2.5 years ago. The Northwest is known for being the most environmentally conscious area in the United States, and Portland is a leader in urban environmentalism. We have bike lanes, composting initiatives, urban watershed restoration, and widespread public transportation. Proposed coal exports are a step backwards. The short and long-term negative impacts are a contradiction to the ethos of the Northwest. In exchange for a small number of jobs, we as a whole are signing up for increased air pollution, noise pollution, water pollution, and more climate change. These projects are part of an ongoing misuse of natural resources around the world that is causing ongoing environmental crises, including crop failures, landslides, superstorms, and climate change. The proposed projects will enable more coal to be burned, exacerbating climate change and its effects. The United States is currently running a trade deficit, a form of debt that is reduced by exporting goods. We are getting caught in a cycle where we extract natural resources and export them, only to import finished goods at a higher cost, putting us in more debt. We have to say no to these economic games and make decisions based on the long-term well-being of people and our communities. If these projects are approved, decision makers are condemning their families, constituencies, and the rest of the country and the world to live in an unstable environment. To all the decision makers out there, please do not approve these permits, and please leave our coal in the ground. Thank you.
This closes our press conference, but I would like to invite everyone to now go outside where we have a special visitor from the North Pole.
Mark, where do you live?
I live in the gorge. You know, I'm an old man, but the next generations are going to have to suffer. It's not for you and me. Come on. It's for the next generations.
Coal is dirty to mine, dirty to transport, dirty to burn. We don't need coal. This is a regression. We need to think of clean energy. I'm very worried about it coming through the gorge, the pollution for the air and water pollution at the site where it's going to be barged, then the air pollution when it actually gets to Asia, gets burned, and then all that goes up, that carbon is sent up here. Climate change is the biggest disaster waiting to happen. It's happening now, and I'm pretty terrified.
Jackie, where do you live?
I live in Oregon City. I've lived there for 23 years. I'm a citizen of the United States now, and I love this part of the world, and we do not need coal.
Santa, what do you have to say about coal?
Well, the spirit of Christmas is all about children, and what we're concerned about is future generations of children inheriting this planet that's polluted. So we are trying to tell Amber Energy not to export this coal overseas where there are no EPA restrictions, where the heavy metals will be released into the air, where the CO2 increases and causes the acidification of the oceans. We can't have that. We need to find alternatives. So what we're asking Amber Energy is to not export the coal. We're asking the DEQ to not permit this, and we're especially asking the Army Corps of Engineers and the Department of State Lands to say no to these projects.
I'm talking to Lloyd Marbet. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Years ago, you were very involved in nuclear power and threats and concerns about the health of people as a result of the nuclear power industry. And you just gave testimony here. What's your sense of the meeting?
Well, I am very dismayed about what's happening with the democratic public process that is taking place in Oregon. I've never seen a meeting in which it came down to sound bites. And it seems to me this agency has a responsibility, if it wants to take public comment as public servants, to sit there and take as long as they need in order to gather the public comments that they seek. What they're doing here is trying to limit that, to restrict the amount of time that you have to speak, to make it almost impossible to make a really cogent argument either for or against whatever it is that they're proposing to do.
Right now, it's the question and answer part, which is, about 2 hours worth of the program.
Right.
And these are very, very short. These are to be questions from individuals. 30 seconds and answers.
And there's 800 people here.
Yeah, it's the biggest.
Wonder what would happen if there was 1,600 people. Would they limit it to just 15 seconds or 5 seconds? I mean, it's just outrageous.
And then following this at 8 o'clock, which is coming up here pretty quick, the concept is, I think, to have up to 3-minute comment by people who have signed up, and it could go on for a long time. But, of course, some of us have come from some distance and won't last that long, I know.
Well, again, if the Department of Environmental Quality is serious about taking public input, then it has a responsibility to hold a process that gives adequate time for all those concerned about an issue to speak to it. I think they have an obligation to do that, and I don't think they're doing that here. I think they're restricting it, limiting it, narrowing it down, making it really impossible for people to really effectively participate, not just participate, but effectively participate.
And it's a concern of many of the speakers that a lot of the answers are, well, our purview is simply the air and water quality at the facility itself,
right,
rather than before the product, in this case coal, gets to it, and rather than after it leaves and what happens to it there.
If DEQ does not feel that it has adequate authority to address the problems of climate change, which it in fact speaks to itself on its website. If you go to their website, they have a whole statement on climate change. They say they're concerned about it. If they're concerned about it and they want to do something and they want to measure what's happening to Oregon, then they have within their purview the opportunity to go to the legislature and to the governor and publicly ask for that authority. What I see is them standing behind the limitation on jurisdiction as an excuse not to take it further.
That's what we set up, we as Oregonians,
to protect the environment.
Just on another issue, are you still working on the nuclear power?
I am.
You are?
Yes, I'm concerned about that because while I have broadened my concern to the scope of the impacts of climate change, I see the nuclear industry using this as an excuse to promote a technology which also doesn't work and which will present more problems rather than getting us to the solutions to address climate change. So I am speaking out.
Good to bring all of these different energy sources together.
I think so.
Using less energy, of course, is another alternative which we're slow to adopt.
Of course.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Health and Healthcare Forum is produced by Roberta Hall and recorded with the aid of Joe Magner of Anabyte Electronics and Recording. Theme music was composed by Laurie Childers and played by Laurie Childers and Kent White.